I spent 4 years living under the same roof as my son, only to hear him tell me I wasn't family. What I did next changed everything, and I'm not sure if I should feel guilty or proud.
Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day.
This really happened to me. It was an ordinary Tuesday, one of those afternoons that hums along like any other, when my son looked right at me and said, plain as if reading out a grocery list, "You're not family. You're just some old guy we let live here." He said it in front of his wife, in front of my granddaughter, right there in my own kitchen. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I gave a single nod, walked down the hallway, and shut myself into the guest room. You won't believe what came next. But before I go on, hit subscribe and drop where you're watching from in the comments. I'll wait. His words hung in the air even after the door clicked. Not shouted, not vindictive, just ordinary, like someone stating a fact that had been rehearsed for months. I sat on the edge of that narrow bed, the guest room they'd slowly turned into overflow storage, and really looked at the place I had once called home. Cardboard boxes with Amazon logos stacked up like small buildings. Nora's winter jackets spilling out of the closet. A messy tower of their daughter's crayon masterpieces in the chair where I used to curl up with a book. Felt like a quiet eviction, one small item at a time, and I'd been too busy to notice how I'd been pushed into the margins. I hadn't signed the deed, sure, but I'd paid the down payment. I co-signed on the mortgage. 4 years ago, when the market went sideways and my pension started covering less and less, I told them I'd move in for a while. Temporary, I thought. I washed dishes, split bills, watched the little ones so they could go out. I fixed the garbage disposal, unclogged a sink, even lent Nora money for a root canal last winter. I thought doing those things would mean something. Apparently, it meant nothing at all. He said that sentence looking directly at me, and that was the thing that landed like a weight in my chest. It wasn't cruel in tone, it was a clarification. "You're a guest. Guests can be shown the door." I stayed in that room the rest of the night. Nobody knocked. No one checked in. No "Dad, you okay?" text. Not even my granddaughter popped her head in like she usually did before bedtime with a drawing to show me. Below I could hear them, the clatter of forks, a TV murmuring some show, my son's laugh. It was a normal family evening, perfectly ordinary, perfectly excluding me. They'd spoken the thought I'd been nursing in silence for a while, that I wasn't really part of the household, just tolerated. And weirdly, I wasn't angry right away. I was stunned, numb, as if my voice had been turned down. I thought back to when they first asked me to move in. "We've got the space, Dad. It'll be great having you around," they'd said. Nora even offered up her home office. That office became a gym, then a sewing corner, then a laundry drop-off. The room with the door that locked became the guest room by the garage with no closet. But I didn't complain. I never demanded a deed or a thank you. I paid for groceries. I sat through diapers and recitals. I figured that was enough to earn some small measure of respect. I was wrong. Over the next 2 days I barely left that room, not on purpose to make a scene, but because something inside me fell quiet and I needed to listen. I listened to them live. I listened to their rhythms through the air vents and the floorboards. I learned the schedule of their days like an engineer maps a failing machine. Nora left with Ava at 8:15 for preschool. My son shuffled out of bed sometime after in his sweatpants, pouring oat milk into a glass and opening his laptop to work, which, let's be honest, meant long stretches of YouTube and fantasy sports. Around 10:30 he'd be on the phone, half complaining about being tired, half trading jokes with friends. They moved through their lives as if nothing had shifted. Meanwhile, I became the background noise. What bothered me most wasn't the cruelty, it was how casual it all was, like they'd all been thinking the same thing and finally decided to say it aloud. Maybe they had been saying it to each other for months. Maybe they assumed I already knew my place. But gratitude should be mutual. Or at least acknowledged. So I started keeping track, quietly, like someone taking inventory. A spiral notebook tucked under the bed. Every dollar I'd put into this household over the last 4 years. Groceries, utilities, lawn service, car repairs. Receipts taped or folded and shoved into that book. I added them up. $38,420. That's the amount I could prove I'd spent while living for free under their roof. And that number didn't include the $110,000 I wired them to help with the down payment when prices spiked. Not included was the $8,000 for Nora's dental surgery. Not included were the countless smaller things, ballet classes, birthday presents, that pink bicycle with training wheels, all paid for because I wanted to give, not to keep score. And yet, one sentence in a kitchen erased me. "You're just some old guy we let live here." No apology. No one tensing up, no embarrassed silence. They all let it sit there. That's when the truth hit me. I hadn't been disrespected by accident. I'd been tolerated. Like an old sofa in the corner, worn but not yet damaged enough to replace, a thing you keep until you don't have to. From that moment, the house shifted in my eyes. Stopped being a warm place with memories and became an asset, a machine I helped finance and keep running. And machines have parts you can remove. They'd forgotten how I helped them qualify for the mortgage. They'd forgotten that my name appeared on the original bank draft and in the email threads with the mortgage broker. I still had access to the realtor portal because I'd been the one who filled out half the paperwork when they were buying the place. They assumed all those links and records had vanished. They hadn't. I remembered, too, that I'd given half the down payment as an act of faith. Not a loan, not a judgment, just help from father to child. Pay me back when you can, I had said then. They never did. I didn't push. I wanted to be the kind of dad who gives without strings. But they had mistaken my generosity for weakness. And now? That mistake was going to cost them everything. I didn't sleep that third night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, not angry, not sad, just thinking. Planning. When morning came, I waited until the house emptied out. Nora was off to work, my son at his chiropractor. I walked into the hallway where the old family desktop still sat gathering dust, turned it on, and opened their homeowner portal. Same password as always, Ava 2020, their daughter's birth year. I didn't change a thing. I just observed. Quietly, methodically. Mortgage balance. Escrow details. Property taxes. I took screenshots, printed statements, and saved copies onto an old flash drive from my office days, silver casing, little company logo still etched into the side. It said, always one step ahead. How fitting, I thought, as the printer hummed softly in the next room. That night I lay awake again, but calmer. Through the cracked guest room door, I watched life go on as usual, my son reheating leftovers, Nora brushing her teeth with her phone in hand, their daughter giggling at some cartoon. Everything looked so normal, but I was already gone in my mind. A man packing invisible bags already halfway out the door. The next couple of days, I barely spoke to them. Didn't need to. They could feel the shift, even if they didn't understand it. On Friday, my son knocked once, just once, on the door. When I didn't answer, he left. No second attempt, no text. That silence told me more than words ever could. I wasn't worth following up on. Good. That would make what came next simpler. Saturday morning, I caught the early bus downtown. Met a lawyer, a quiet woman recommended by a friend. I explained everything, the house, the payments, the "you're not family" speech. Handed her every document I'd saved. She studied the stack, then looked up at me, brows raised. You paid over 50% of the house's equity, she said slowly. And you're not on the deed? Didn't want to complicate things, I replied. But they've done that for me. She nodded. You have a case. It won't be fast, but it's strong. If we move quickly, you could secure a lien. That's all I need, I told her. No drama. No headlines. Just a quiet correction. Understood, she said. By the time I walked out of her office, the plan was in motion. The fall sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in years, I wasn't just enduring life, I was steering it. Picked up a small bag of groceries on the way home. Flash drive in one pocket, receipt folder in the other. The weight of both was about the same. When I reached the driveway, the air felt sharper somehow. My son was mowing the lawn, rare event. Nora was chatting on her phone, barely glancing up as I walked past. I gave her a polite nod and went straight to my room. The house buzzed with its usual weekend life, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. And strangely, that no longer hurt. Clarified everything. I pulled out the envelope I'd kept tucked away for years, every original wire receipt, every note from the down payment. They'd never asked to see them back then. They'd been grateful, or at least pretended to be. Now, those papers were evidence, proof that I wasn't just a guest, but the reason they had a roof at all. I spread them neatly on the bed, transfers, inspection costs, even the $7,800 check I'd written when their account overdraft at closing. Every line item labeled, every date clear. I'd always been meticulous, raised to file things, to keep records. Back then, it just felt like habit. Now, it felt like foresight. I scanned and emailed everything to my lawyer. Subject line, ownership contributions, confidential. Her reply came less than an hour later. This is solid. We'll begin proceedings Monday morning. That was all I needed to hear. Once the lien was filed, it would show up on the property title like a storm cloud. They wouldn't be able to refinance, remortgage, or sell a thing without addressing it. Either they'd pay me my share or they'd sell the house outright. I didn't care which. I was leaving regardless. That weekend, I played the part of the quiet, helpful dad. I smiled when Nora passed in the hall. I nodded when my son asked if I could feed the dog. I even fixed a dripping faucet upstairs. Everything looked the same on the outside, but the balance had shifted. I wasn't the invisible man in the house anymore. I was the one pulling the strings behind it. Monday morning arrived with cool air and birdsong. I was making coffee when I heard the clang of the mailbox at 10:12 a.m. My son was on a Zoom call. Nora was scrolling her tablet at the counter. I opened the door, pulled out a thick envelope, scanned the return address, and set it carefully in the middle of the dining table. This came for you, I said, calm as ever, and went back to my room. Half an hour later, the storm began. Paper shuffling. Raised voices. Not rage, panic. He can't do this. Nora's voice cracked through the wall. Silence followed. Then footsteps. Doors shutting. I lay on the bed, hands behind my head, watching the ceiling fan I'd installed years ago spin in lazy circles. It was oddly peaceful. By evening, the tension in the house was electric. My son's footsteps kept pacing the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and clipped, probably calling a lawyer or his mother or maybe some friend to complain about the ungrateful old man. I didn't care. The paperwork was filed. The clock was ticking. I gave them 3 days to talk, apologize, or pretend nothing was wrong. They chose silence, tiptoeing around me like guilty children. On the 4th day, I met with a real estate agent named Dennis, a quiet man who handled court-ordered sales. "Do you live in the property now?" he asked, flipping through the paperwork. I nodded. "And you want to sell?" "Yes." Cleanly. He examined the documents, his face unreadable. "This won't be fast," he said. "But it'll be final. If the judge orders the sale, they can't stop it." "That's the point," I told him. "They made it clear I'm not family, just some old guy they let live here." Dennis set down his pen, looked at me once and said, "Then it's time to stop living like a guest." That night, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I cooked. Not just a quick meal, but his favorite. Pasta carbonara. The smell of garlic and bacon filled the kitchen, rich and warm like it used to when he was a kid sitting at the table, feet swinging, waiting for dinner. And sure enough, that smell lured him in again. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, eyes darting between me and the bubbling pan. "What's this?" he asked. "Dinner," I said. "Figured I'd cook while I still can." The words hit him a moment late, like a slow punch. He didn't respond, just gave a stiff nod and went upstairs. Nora never came down. But Ava peeked in, nose wrinkling, a shy grin on her face. "That smells really good, Grandpa." Just that one sentence, so small and honest, cracked something in me. Not enough to break, just enough to remind me why I had stayed all this time. She was the only one who still looked at me with love instead of obligation. I served myself a plate. Ate alone. Washed every dish. Then went back to the guest room that no longer felt like a punishment, just a temporary stop before freedom. The next morning, a new letter arrived. This one wasn't from my lawyer, it was from the court. A formal notice of proceedings. Acknowledgement of the equity dispute. A petition for forced sale. I didn't even bring it in. I left it sitting in the mailbox like a time bomb. By noon, Nora found it. By 12:05, the shouting began. Through the open window, I heard every syllable. Her accusing him of lying about the down payment, him swearing he didn't think I'd actually go through with it. Her crying. Him swearing. The sound of paper ripping. And me? I was sitting in the garden with a crossword puzzle, the breeze brushing against my face, the faint hum of chaos behind me. They were unraveling, slowly, piece by piece, the same way they had unraveled my dignity. That evening, my son finally knocked on my door. Once. Then opened it without waiting. "Dad." Not a greeting, not a plea. Just my name. I looked up from my notebook. "Yes." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. Are you really doing this?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood, walked to the nightstand, and opened the drawer. Inside was the note I'd written the night he told me I wasn't family. I handed it to him. He read it slowly, lips moving. Then again, this time quieter. When he looked up, his face was a mix of shame and anger. "You don't have to do this." "I know," I said calmly. "But I will." He didn't fight. He just folded the paper neatly, set it on the desk, and walked out. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped letting people take pieces of me without permission. The next morning, the house was silent. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy, broken kind. The kind I remembered after my wife died, when the air itself felt bruised. Everyone spoke in short, clipped sentences. "Ava, get your backpack." "Did you feed the dog?" "We're out of coffee." No warmth. No laughter. Just logistics. I moved through the house like a ghost, unseen but not unwelcome, just inconvenient. And that suited me fine. Gave me space to watch. They didn't know that mediation had already been set for 2 weeks from now. They didn't know Dennis had begun discreet buyer outreach under a private clause in our agreement. All they knew was that the house, their house, was slipping out of their control. That afternoon, Nora's mother showed up. I knew the sound of that red Buick anywhere, parked crooked like always. Within 10 minutes, her voice was rising in the living room. "He's still here? You need to fix this. What if he wins?" I heard my son trying to calm her, heard Nora whisper something about me not being well, maybe just stressed. But I wasn't stressed. I was calm, clearer than I'd been in decades. I sat in the backyard, pruning the gardenias I'd planted when they first moved in. That was my gift, the whole backyard. The stone path, the flowering shrubs, the small bench where I used to sit with Ava, telling her stories about storms and migrating birds. They hadn't touched it in months. The path was cracked now. One of the lights was broken. Weeds had taken root between the stones. I pulled them out by hand while the voices inside the house rose and fell like a storm. And in that moment, peace came not from vengeance but from proportion. For years, I'd made myself smaller for their comfort. Paid without question. Helped without acknowledgement. Endured disrespect and called it patience. But that patience had worn through, threadbare and useless. Around 4 p.m. my son came outside. His face was caught between guilt and frustration. "Can we talk?" he asked. I set down the shears and nodded. We sat on the bench I'd stained myself. "I didn't mean what I said last week," he started, voice shaky. "About you not being family." I said nothing. Just let the silence stretch. He squirmed under it. "We were tired. Stressed. You know how life gets." "I do," I said simply. That startled him, the fact I answered at all. He fumbled on. "Nora's upset. The court papers, the lien, it's a lot." "I imagine it is. She's scared we'll lose everything," he admitted finally, looking at me as though seeing the full weight of what he'd set in motion for the first time. "You wouldn't really sell it, would you?" he asked quietly. I turned to face him. Not angry. Just steady. "You told me I wasn't family," I said softly. "Just an old man you let live here." He opened his mouth to protest. "You meant it," I interrupted gently. "You said it with comfort. That's how I know it was true." He rubbed his jaw, staring down at the grass. I let him sit in the silence a moment longer before I continued. "So here's what happens now. The house will be listed. Mediation's set. You can buy me out, fine. If not, we sell. I don't want to fight, but I won't live in a home where I'm treated like clutter." His voice was small when he said, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." He didn't speak again. Just nodded once and went inside. That night there was no home-cooked meal, only takeout. The sound of forks scraping containers echoed through the walls, a quiet countdown to the end. I stayed in my room reviewing emails from Dennis. 2 interested buyers already, one from Arizona, another local family hoping to move before school started. I updated my spreadsheet, projected sale value, my equity share, possible cities for relocation. To number felt like oxygen. Not greed. Not revenge. Just closure. They had erased me with a sentence. Now I was erasing myself with a signature. The next morning, Ava found me sitting out back, trimming what was left of the gardenias. She climbed up onto the bench beside me, swinging her little legs quiet for a while. Finally, she said, "Mommy says you're mad." I set down the clippers and smiled faintly. "I'm not mad," I told her. "I'm disappointed." Her brow furrowed. "Is that worse?" I thought for a second. "Yeah," I said softly. "Because mad fades. Disappointment lingers." She nodded, taking that in like it was a secret she wasn't supposed to know. Then, after a pause, she whispered, "Will you still come to my recital?" I looked at her, those tiny mismatched socks, those folded hands, that open, unfiltered love only a child can have. Loyalty without condition. "I'll try," I said. "But things are changing, sweetheart." She didn't ask what that meant. She just leaned her head against my arm. And for a moment I almost questioned it all, whether I should stay, swallow my pride again. But then I remembered the look on her father's face when he realized the home he ruled didn't actually belong to him. And I knew Ava would be fine. She'd adapt. One day, maybe she'd understand. A few days later, an email came from Dennis. Subject, offer received. Full cash. Buyer wants to close fast. Your portion, $412,000. I stared at the number, not because of greed, but because it meant freedom. For the first time in years, something was truly mine. No shared titles, no "we'll split it later." Just clean ownership. I signed the acceptance form that afternoon. The court would finalize it within 10 business days. I had already packed 2 suitcases, nothing more. I didn't announce it. I didn't owe them the courtesy of a countdown. They'd find out when their keys didn't fit. When the locks refused to turn, they'd finally understand what I meant by leaving for good. The 10th day came wrapped in a quiet kind of tension, the air thick, the sky gray and watchful. The kind of morning that feels paused between breaths. I sat on the edge of the bed in slacks and a button-up, sipping coffee from the chipped mug they'd once given me for Father's Day. "World's best dad," it read in faded blue letters. The irony had outlived the ink. Inside, the world moved like nothing had changed. Joggers in matching outfits, a garbage truck grumbling down the street, kids weaving bicycles across the pavement. But inside that house, everything was different. Nora hadn't spoken to me in 3 days. My son avoided my eyes entirely. The silence between us was sharp and fragile, like a glass wall waiting to shatter. I let it hold. I let it cut them the way their words had cut me. Then at 6 a.m., Dennis called. "It's done," he said simply. "Funds wired. Title transferred. They'll be notified before noon." I thanked him and hung up. No celebration, no champagne. I'd already packed my life into the trunk of the car, my wallet, ID, toothbrush, and a folded note I'd written the night before. 4 sentences, precise, balanced, deliberate. kind of message an engineer leaves when closing a final project. At 9:30, I placed the note on the kitchen table, the same one I'd assembled myself years ago. Paid for delivery. Tightened every bolt. Now it was my turn to leave something behind. Not out of anger, but finality. A signature at the bottom of a blueprint that no longer needed revision. I walked through the house slowly, not to reminisce, but to account for what I was leaving. Every room carried ghosts of small betrayals. The night they brought Ava home. The Thanksgiving I cooked alone. The Christmas they forgot to buy me a gift and brushed it off with a laugh. You're impossible to shop for. Not one grand insult, just 1,000 tiny ones that hollowed a man from the inside out. I paused at Ava's door, covered in crayon drawings and stickers half peeled away. I pressed my palm gently against it. Didn't knock. Didn't open it. Just stood there long enough to feel the warmth of what I was walking away from. Then I turned, stepped into the garage, and started the car. No music. No backward glance. The engine purred to life, steady and calm, as I rolled out of the driveway I'd mowed, shoveled, patched, and swept for 4 years. The house shrank in the mirror until it was just another roofline, a silhouette against the overcast sky. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a monument to misplaced trust. They'd thought my loyalty was eternal, that my kindness was theirs to claim, that my silence meant approval. They were wrong. 10 minutes later, I pulled into a diner off Route 8, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like habit. The waitress called me Han without thinking. I sat by the window, ordered eggs and toast, and waited. 10:42, Nora called. I let it ring. 10:47, a text. Why are the locks changed? Did you move out without saying anything? At 11:02, my son called. I answered this one. Dad, what the hell is going on? His voice was already tight with panic. Why can't we get in the house? I stirred sugar into my coffee. You'll need to contact the new owners, I said evenly. I left a note. What new owners? What are you talking about? I sold the house, I replied. 10 days ago. Closed this morning. Silence. Then disbelief. You can't do that. You don't even. I paid half the equity, I cut in. Filed a lien. You ignored it. The court didn't. You're insane, he snapped. This is our home. It was, I said quietly. Until you told me I wasn't family. His voice cracked. You took everything from us. No, I said, calm as still water. You gave it away. I just collected what was mine. There was a pause, then a sharp exhale, the kind that carries every ounce of regret too late to matter. Then he hung up. I finished my coffee, ate my toast, and left a few bills on the counter. No rush. No guilt. Just peace. 2:30 p.m., Dennis texted. They'd been notified. Keys turned over. Sale complete. I replied with 2 words, thank you. Then I switched off my phone, placed it in the glove box, and started driving. No destination in mind, just forward. I had done exactly what they said they wanted, disappeared. Only this time I took the house with me. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just silence, final, surgical, and absolute. I drove north toward the coast, not because I had some grand plan, but because the ocean had always been the one constant that made sense when everything else didn't. I had enough now to buy something small outright. Quiet place with clean light and space to breathe. A home where silence didn't feel like punishment. A place where every wall recognized that I belonged there. In the rearview mirror, the city blurred into streaks of silver and gray. Not gone, just smaller, shrinking like a memory that had finally stopped asking to be remembered. With every mile, the heaviness of those 4 years slipped off me, piece by piece. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was free. That night, I checked into a roadside motel 2 towns away. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and ocean air. The sheets were crisp, the air quiet, no footsteps overhead, no sighs of irritation about the thermostat. I stretched out on the bed, watching the evening light fade across the ceiling, soft and slow. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like a man reclaiming his space in the world. I fell asleep without apology, without fear, without dreams. When morning came, the first thing I heard was the cry of seagulls. The kind of sound that reminds you the world keeps moving no matter who you leave behind. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the salt air drift through the cracked window. The sky was pale and still, the kind of blue that looks freshly painted. The old version of me would have reached for my phone right then, checking for missed calls, for guilt, for rage disguised as concern. But I didn't. The phone stayed locked away in the glove compartment where it belonged. Whatever storm they were caught in now was theirs. I was no longer their anchor. I was the current that had finally moved on. I shaved, packed my single bag, and checked out. The woman at the front desk asked if I needed anything for the road. No, I said, then added, thank you for the quiet. She gave me a small smile, the kind that says she understood exactly what I meant. Some people know that silence can be mercy, not emptiness. I drove west without direction. Through redwood groves tall enough to swallow sound, past wide stretches of gold grass and crooked fences. I stopped for gas in a town so small the stoplight blinked on a loop even when no cars passed. There was a diner on the corner, coffee 99 cents in faded paint. Inside, the air smelled of bacon grease and maple syrup. The waitress called me darling and poured coffee without asking. I took a booth by the window and ordered eggs, bacon, toast. No phone on the table, no waiting for anyone. Just me, a plate of food, and the quiet rhythm of morning. I watched people drift in and out, a man with sunburned arms and dusty overalls, a pair of teenagers sharing pancakes, a mother juggling 2 paper cups while her kids laughed in the car outside. None of them knew me. None of them looked through me. For the first time in years, I was just another person in the world. Not a burden. Not a background fixture. Just human. I paid in cash, left a generous tip, and stepped back into the light. The sky had started to soften into gray. Fog rolled in from the coast, swallowing the horizon in pale mist. I got back in the car and followed the signs that pointed west toward the sound of waves. By mid-afternoon, I reached a small overlook. I parked, stepped out, and walked to the railing. Below me, the Pacific stretched forever, blue-gray and endless, the waves folding and breaking like something ancient and unconcerned. I stood there for a long time, hands in my pockets, breathing in the salt and the wind. No noise, no tension, just the rhythm of the ocean and my own heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the moment belonged entirely to me. Not borrowed, not shared, not tolerated. Just mine. I took a picture, not for anyone else but for proof. Proof that I'd stood there, proof that I'd started over. Later, I drove into the nearby town. Small streets lined with weathered houses and hand-painted signs. I spotted one leaning on a fence post, for sale. Faded paint, but the phone number was clear. I called. A man named Will answered, voice steady and slow. We talked about what I wanted, quiet privacy, no stares, no expectations. He listened, then said, come by the office tomorrow. I think I've got something you'll like. He was right. The next morning, he drove me to a cottage just off a side road near the water. 1 story, white paint chipped by sea wind, seagrass curling along the fence. 2 bedrooms. A porch that creaked when you stepped on it. If you leaned far enough, you could see the ocean. It wasn't big. It wasn't new. But it felt honest. I didn't need luxury. I needed peace. I'll take it, I said. Cash. No contingencies. Will blinked, surprised, then smiled. Well, he said, then I guess this one's yours. We shook hands, no contracts, no small talk, just a quiet deal between 2 men who both knew what it meant to want stillness. For the first time in years, I had a home. Not a borrowed one. Not one I had to earn through endurance. Just mine. Back in my car, I allowed myself one indulgence. I opened the glove box and powered on the phone I'd buried days ago. The screen blinked to life with a low buzz, angry and insistent, like it resented being ignored. 17 missed calls. 24 unread texts. All from my son. I didn't open them. I just scrolled to the bottom. The last one, sent at 3:14 a.m., read, I don't understand how you could do this to us. I stared at it for a long while. The words didn't sting. They just confirmed what I already knew. He still saw it as something I'd done to him, not something I'd done for myself. For a minute, I turned the phone off again and slid it back into the glove box. That device didn't belong to me anymore. Not really. Belonged to the man I used to be, the one who tolerated disrespect in the name of family. The one who mistook silence for strength and sacrifice for love. That man was gone. The quiet that followed had taught me more than any apology ever could. That night, I checked into a small inn while the paperwork for the new house made its way through the system. The walls were thin and the mattress uneven, but it didn't matter. I was rebuilding from scratch, and starting from nothing has a strange way of sharpening your gratitude. I boiled water in the tiny kettle, made tea, and sat by the window as fog rolled in from the coast, swallowing the streetlights one by one until the whole world turned soft and gray. I thought about Ava. Just her. The way she'd leaned her head against my arm in the garden, her socks mismatched, her loyalty pure and wordless. Her eyes reminded me of her mother's before time and disappointment made them hard. I knew I might never see her again. That was the price. But if I had stayed, I would have become a ghost inside those walls, haunting a house I helped build, invisible until needed. Leaving meant loss, yes, but it also meant I was a man again. A man with a name, a deed, and a key that turned only when he decided. I went to bed just before midnight and slept the whole night through. No footsteps overhead. No muffled arguments through thin walls. No shame pressing against my chest like weight. Just silence, deep, honest, earned. The next 3 days passed gently, like the world had finally exhaled. The sale closed. Cottage became legally mine. I bought a second-hand couch from a woman named Clara who insisted on adding a loaf of banana bread for free. My husband never sat on it, she said, patting the armrest. You'll give it a better life. I thanked her and strapped it to the roof with twine. At a thrift store, I picked out plates, silverware, and a set of sheets with faint blue stripes. Cashier reminded me of my sister, soft laugh, hair tucked behind one ear, sleeves pushed up past her elbows. I left the store with a box under my arm and a strange lightness in my chest. When I carried everything into the cottage, there was no sense of lacking. Just the opposite. Every single thing inside that house was something I had chosen. Not inherited. Not imposed. Not an act of appeasement. It was the first space in years that reflected who I was, not who I'd been expected to be. That first evening I made a simple dinner, just a sandwich and a thermos of tea, and ate it on the porch. The air smelled of pine and sea salt. No television droning. No doors slamming. No tension humming like static in the walls. I watched a pair of raccoons shuffle across the driveway, pausing to glance at me before disappearing into the brush. I smiled. For the first time, I didn't feel unseen. I just felt unbothered. The next night, I installed a new lock on the front door. The hardware clerk had offered to send someone to do it for me, but I declined. Some tasks you need to do with your own hands. When it clicked smoothly into place, I held the key for a long moment, turning it over in my palm. Simple. Solid. Mine. Power may quiet. On the third day, a letter arrived. My name scrawled across the envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my son's. For a minute, I considered tossing it into the fire. But curiosity won. 3 pages. Mostly defense disguised as remorse. He wrote about stress, pressure, miscommunication. About how Nora never meant what she said, how I'd misunderstood, how I'd taken it too far. Then, buried in the middle, a line that almost sounded tender. You've always been sensitive about family. I stopped there. Folded the pages once, neatly, and placed them in an empty drawer. No label. No folder. Just a resting place for things that no longer mattered. Because it wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. A test to see if I'd slip back into my old role, the quiet, forgiving father who absorbed hurt like a sponge and called it love. But that version of me was gone. And I had no interest in resurrecting him. I spent the rest of that day on my knees in the dirt, planting a rosemary bush by the porch. My wife used to love the smell of it. Said it reminded her of summers when we were young, warm, simple, full of small plans that felt like forever. As I pressed the roots into the soil and patted it down, I wasn't grieving. I wasn't clinging to the past. I was just acknowledging it. That little green sprig stood there like a quiet monument to memory. Not sorrow. Not loss. Just presence. That night, I cooked myself a real dinner, not the quick meals I'd been living on for months. Pan-seared trout, roasted potatoes, a salad that leaned too heavy on the vinegar but tasted alive. I sat one place at the table, ate slowly, washed every dish, wiped down the counters until they gleamed. No one left crumbs behind. No one sighed about how I folded the towels. For once, everything in that kitchen existed exactly as I left it. Before bed, I cracked the window just an inch, the way I used to before someone would inevitably complain about the draft. The night air slipped in cool and clean. When I woke the next morning, it was to birdsong, not footsteps, not voices, not the uneasy rhythm of walking on eggshells. I stepped outside barefoot into the damp grass. The dew clung to my skin, cold but grounding. And for the first time in years, I felt stillness, not the empty kind that fills space after chaos, but the full kind that claims space as its own. The world wasn't pushing against me anymore. It was waiting for me to move at my own pace. Later that morning, I got an email from Dennis. Subject, transfer complete. New owners have moved in. Transition smooth. No further contact needed. I stared at that line for a long moment. Not in disbelief, in recognition. It was over. The house, the noise, the role I had played in their universe, all dissolved into past tense. I wasn't the orbiting father anymore. I was a man rebuilding his own gravity. I closed the email, deleted the thread, and exhaled. That afternoon, I drove into the next town and bought a wooden bench from a local craftsman. He offered to deliver it, but I said I wanted to carry it myself. It wasn't heavy. Just honest. I placed it under the tree in my backyard, the kind of tree that bent easily in the wind but never broke. I sat there for an hour, no phone, no noise, just the soft percussion of leaves shifting overhead. I thought about Ava. I always did. About her mismatched socks, her laugh, the way she leaned against me in the garden like I was a safe place. I wondered if she'd understand one day, not the logistics, not the paperwork, but the heart of it. That sometimes leaving isn't cruelty, it's survival. I hoped she'd remember the stories I told her under the old tree at the other house. Maybe someday she'd tell them again and understand why I left when I did. Children don't always understand truth when they inherit it. They have to live long enough to see it repeat. Maybe one day, when someone treats her love like it's disposable, she'll think of the man who once built a garden in silence and walked away when he was told he didn't belong. That evening, a knock startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find a teenage boy holding a pizza box. "Order for Mr. Davis?" he asked. I paused, smiled faintly. That's me. I hadn't ordered anything. But someone had. I paid, tipped him well, and closed the door. Inside the box, tucked under the corner of the lid, was a folded note. "I'm sorry. I miss you. Can we talk?" No signature. Didn't need one. I stood there for a moment, then placed the note gently into the trash. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Some things aren't meant to be reopened. I warmed the pizza in the oven, poured myself a drink, and ate it on the porch while the sky bled lavender into the sea. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just was. Fully present. Fully whole. Finally home. Weeks passed. 2, then 3. Quiet held. The world didn't shatter without them. I met my neighbors. Helen, a retired schoolteacher with a laugh like wind chimes, lived to the left. Thomas, a widowed gardener with soil under his nails, lived to the right. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was simple. Kind. The wind's picking up. Your rosemary's coming in strong. Want some lemons? No tension. No subtext. Just life shared in fragments gently. I started waking earlier, walking the beach at dawn while the fishermen hauled nets ashore. The same gulls. The same crooked warning sign about sneaker waves. Some mornings I brought bread to feed the birds, other mornings I brought nothing but breath. The air felt cleaner here, not because of salt or sea, but because, for the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. One morning, while walking along the shoreline, I saw a boy, maybe 6 or 7, crouched beside a tide pool, his small finger tracing the ripples as he pointed at a hermit crab. His father knelt next to him, patient, smiling, explaining something only the two of them could hear over the crash of waves. I kept walking, but I couldn't help glancing back. For a moment, I wondered if that man had ever been told he was just some old guy we let live here. Probably not. I hoped he never would be. In the afternoons, I fell into a rhythm, sitting on the porch with a book. Mostly nonfiction, old engineering manuals, faded paperbacks I'd once sworn I'd read someday. Sometimes I didn't even turn a page. I just listened, to the wind through the grass, to the creak of my chair, to the low hum of a plane cutting across the horizon. The first time I heard a child's laugh drift over the fence, I froze. Reflex. My mind braced for recognition. But it wasn't Ava. It wasn't anyone I knew. Just another kid on a bike, laughing freely in a life that didn't include me. I stood there for a while, waiting for the sting that never came. Then I realized I wasn't sad. I was free. Every now and then, echoes of old voices tried to crawl back in. My son's frustrated tone, Nora's clipped corrections, the sound of utensils scraping plates in a kitchen that had felt more like a job than a home. But the memories were quieter now. Fainter. Ghosts lose their power when you stop feeding them. One evening, while organizing a drawer, I found the letter again, the one my son had written after I left. I didn't even remember putting it there. I unfolded it and read it once more. The words hadn't changed, but I had. What once read like guilt now read like justification. What once felt like hope now felt like a trap disguised as sentiment. I folded it neatly, walked it out to the small fire pit, and struck a match. Paper caught slow at first, then bloomed into orange, curling in on itself as ink turned to smoke. I watched until it disappeared into the night air. No tears. No triumph. Just release. That night I slept with the windows open. The house stayed still. No rattling pains. No anxious thoughts pacing through my head. I'd stopped waiting for closure to arrive in someone else's handwriting. I had given it to myself. And that, I was beginning to understand, was what peace actually looks like. Not forgiveness, not resolution. Just quiet. A few weeks later, on a soft spring morning, I stopped by a small bakery downtown. The woman behind the counter, mid-40s, flour on her hands and a tired warmth in her smile, said, "Try the rosemary scones. They smell like your front yard." I chuckled. "You noticed." "Hard not to," she said. "That scent carries." I ordered 2. She asked for my name and wrote it carefully across the paper bag in looping cursive. I hadn't seen anyone take that kind of care with my name in years. Back at the cottage, I sat on the bench beneath the tree and ate in silence. The scone was warm, crumbly, soft in the middle. Tasted like something familiar, something healed. Some things, I thought, come back to you in new forms if you leave enough room for them to find you. That same day, a postcard arrived in the mail. No return address. Just handwriting I'd know anywhere. "Grandpa, I miss you. I don't know where you went. I drew you something, but Mom said I shouldn't send it. So I just want you to know I think about you every time I see a rosemary bush. That's still your smell. Love, Ava." I sat there holding that card, tracing her crooked letters with my thumb. My hands didn't shake, but my eyes blurred. I didn't write back. There was nowhere to send it. And even if there had been, what could I say? That I missed her too? That leaving wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation? That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for the people you love is refuse to let them keep diminishing you? Instead, I slid the postcard into the drawer beside my bed. Not hidden. Not framed. Just kept, because some things deserve to stay quietly where they can breathe. That night, I walked along the beach until the horizon turned violet. The tide moved in and out like breath, the sand shifting beneath my feet with every wave. I thought of all the men I'd known who'd never escaped the slow erosion of being needed only for what they provided. Men who died sitting at kitchen tables mistaken for furniture. I realized I hadn't become one of them. I left in time. The wind picked up, the waves stretched, and the world went on turning without hesitation. I stood there, steady and salt-stung, realizing that I had finally become something like the ocean itself. Not anchored but constant. Not fixed but free. By the time I pulled into the drive, the cottage was glowing through the windows, golden and calm against the dark. The rosemary bush by the porch leaned a little in the wind, the air sharp with its scent. I stepped inside, turned the key, and listened to the lock click shut, clean, simple, final. And for the first time in my life, I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone. Not to any god. Just to the quiet. To the moment. To the fact that I had finally chosen myself before it was too late. I never saw them again. No visits. No photos. No chance encounters at the grocery store. My son never wrote another letter. Nora never called. Maybe Ava asked about me once or twice. Maybe she remembered my stories, the rosemary bush, the pancakes, the way I always let her stir the batter even when it coated the floor. Or maybe she forgot. That's how life works. Children adapt and adults rewrite history until it's comfortable to tell. They probably said I moved away. Maybe for work. Maybe for my health. Maybe because I needed space. But not the truth. No one ever says we treated him like a burden until he left. That kind of honesty is too expensive. But I didn't leave for honesty. Or revenge. I left for survival. Because there comes a point when a man realizes he's been erased so many times that he starts craving anything with edges again. And when I found this house, this small town, this silence, I understood. I wasn't broken. I'd just been misplaced. Even gold looks like rust in the wrong light. Now my days are built around calm. Predictable, peaceful, steady. I read more. I cook better. I sleep through the night. I don't wait for the phone to ring anymore. It hasn't, and that silence that once felt like punishment now feels like proof. Proof that they needed me only as long as I kept giving. When I stopped, they disappeared. Which means they were never really there. And I've made peace with that. The mistake wasn't loving them. It was believing love alone would earn respect. But love without boundaries isn't devotion, it's captivity. And I had served my sentence. I still walk the beach every morning, the same stretch of sand, the same jagged rock jutting out like a tooth in the surf. Sometimes I pass couples holding hands. Sometimes I pass old men walking alone. We nod to each other like ghosts who share the same unfinished story. One morning, a boy stood near the cliffs, flying a bright red kite. The wind caught it perfectly, and it climbed higher, higher until even the string seemed invisible. He watched it, unblinking, trusting the wind to hold what he couldn't control. I stood there longer than I meant to, watching him, thinking of Ava, not with pain but with softness. She was the only one who ever saw me as more than the role I filled. But children grow. They inherit the narratives around them. I don't blame her. I just let her go the way I let the rest of it go, gently. One evening, I opened the last box I carried from the old house. It had followed me through 4 moves, 2 decades, and 1 heartbreak. Inside were photo albums, receipts, and a Father's Day card from 1998, the kind made by tracing little hands into turkey feathers. In uneven letters it read, "To Dad, the best guy in the world." I held it for a long time. Then I put it back, closed the lid, and carried the box out to the shed. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't need it nearby anymore. Some memories aren't for forgetting, but they're not for display either. They're anchors, meant to remind you where you came from, not to drag you back there. That night I made soup from scratch. Turned off every light except the one above the stove. Ate standing up, barefoot, with cold air creeping through the cracked window. It made me feel alive, not young, not new, just real. Afterward, I sat on the bench beneath the tree, watching the stars come alive one by one. No noise. No phone. Just the soft hum of the wind through the leaves and the quiet heartbeat of a man who finally had nothing left to defend. That's what people misunderstand about solitude. It isn't loneliness. It's evidence. Proof that you've stopped begging for what no one ever intended to give. A week later, the mailman knocked, first time he ever had. "Got something here you'll need to sign for," he said. It was a letter from the county clerk. A final closure on the property case. Partition sale complete. File closed. I smiled, signed, tucked it neatly into my desk drawer. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in, the kind that starts with a moan of wind and ends in a hush so complete it feels holy. I sat on the porch barefoot, a mug of tea in my hands, the chimes tangled above me, and the house creaking like an old friend settling in. When the lightning flashed, I saw my reflection in the window, tired maybe but not worn. At exactly 11:13, the power flickered once, then steadied. That's how I felt. Disrupted but never lost. I went to bed early, slept without dreams, and woke the next morning with the same peace that has carried me ever since. Now, on some fog-heavy mornings, I stand by the rosemary bush and think about how close I came to staying too long. How many people are still out there, waiting for permission to reclaim themselves? I hope they find it. Not because I'm wise, but because I know what it costs not to. And if they don't, I hope someone, anyone, looks them in the eye before it's too late and says, "You're not just some old guy we let live here. You are the home we forgot how to respect. But even if no one ever says it, that's all right. Because I already did. And that, in the end, was enough.
Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.